I managed to purloin this picture of it today at the couturier's luncheon. Oh!
That's the signature purr of Eartha Kitt in her iconic role as Catwoman in the 1960s TV series Batman. Miss Kitt passed away in 2008, but her daughter, Kitt Shapiro, is here keeping her legacy alive as the CEO of Eartha Kitt Productions. Kitt Shapiro is here to talk with us exclusively about that legacy, in entertainment, as a mother, and as a social activist. So, Ms. Kitt Shapiro, life was no crystal stair for your mother, Eartha Kitt. When she was growing up, her mother left her to live with other family members. And as she was growing up, she was criticized by other African Americans for being light-skinned. Did she ever talk to you about how her negative traits in her upbringing affected her outlook on life?
Well, this was all in the South, of course. She was in South Carolina where she was born. And she was light-skinned, which was not an easy position to be in. She would talk about that, yes. That when you're too light, you're not dark enough for the African-American community. And she was not light enough for the white community. And she didn't have a father that she knew of. She didn't know who her father was, so she was illegitimate on top of that. So she had a very difficult time in the South. I'm not sure. She had a lot of pain from it, but I don't know if she felt so much anger or hatred because of it. I think she understood that she was just born the way she was, and it was the way society was at the time.
Particularly with her childhood, because it was not rosy. Many people who have troubled youth experiences when they get older say, I don't think I want to have kids, I don't want to have a family, because I don't really know what that's like. Did she ever express to you any qualms about starting a family?
She knew very early on that she wanted a family. But I think one of the reasons she did want a family is because she didn't have one. And she didn't feel that she knew who she was or who she belonged to, and that having a family would give her a foundation. And she named me Kitt, and she used to introduce the two of us, and we'd walk into a room, and she'd say, I'm Eartha, this is Kitt, as if I completed her. And I think in many ways I did complete her. I think that she felt that she really gave birth to her rock, her foundation, that gave her a reason to continue working and fighting for, and speaking out, and all the things that she did in her life was in many ways because of me. Well, having a child, not me per se, but
Yeah. How does she pay her dues starting out in her career? I've always been amazed because we know that in every career you have to pay your dues. And some people, when they're starting out in acting, do waitressing at night. What did Ms. Kitt do to get by in the early stages?
Well, she stumbled into show business. So her dues she paid in the business itself. She didn't go in. She didn't say, "Oh, I'm going to be a dancer or an actress," and then start supporting herself as a waitress while she auditioned. She was very young. She lived in Spanish Harlem at the time, and she was going to school. And this young girl came along she was standing with friends, and this girl came along with this list of makeup. And she said, do you know where I can find this makeup shop? And my mother looked at the girl, and she said, well, you're very young to be needing all that makeup. What do you need that makeup for? And the girl said, well, I'm with the Katherine Dunham dance troupe, and Miss Dunham sent me out to get the makeup for the dance company. And somehow a conversation ensued, and somehow my mother's friend dared her to audition for the dance troupe. And my mother had never taken dance, and she danced on the streets, to the music she heard on the streets, as she would have said. And she went and auditioned, and she won a full scholarship, and that's how she ended up in show business. So her dues were paid while she, went on the road with Miss Dunham and then tried to go out on her own. So her dues were paid along the way, but it was all just a dare how she ended up being in show business to begin with.
You said something in that answer that I found to be an aha moment. You said she danced to the music she heard in her head.
Her head and on the streets. She grew up where she heard Latin music, and she heard the blues, and she heard different types of drums and different beats. And so she would tell me she heard, Billie Holiday singing on the radio, but yet she would hear the conga drums of, people just playing music. So she really had this, what she would refer to as the salsa. That, I think that she was genetic on some level, that she had from the South. I mean, she was just born to be a survivor and to somehow hear the music somewhere, wherever
It was such
it may
a
be.
poignant statement, though. She danced to the music she heard in her head. Because a lot of people, when they look at Eartha Kitt's life, she danced to the beat of her own drum.
She definitely did.
And she had a lot of ups and a lot of downs in her career. One of them being the Vietnam War, where she took a very unpopular at that time stance against the war. And she, again, danced to the beat of her own drum and the music that she heard in her head, and faced a lot of resistance and backlash because of it. Did she express to you any resentment against America or against society for that backlash?
No, she didn't really have resentment. She was bewildered at people's inability to accept her opinion. Because what she would state, I don't think she ever really said that this is the truth. She would say, this is my truth. This is what I believe. This is what I've heard, and this is what I believe. Not so much of a blanket statement as that this is how it should be. She felt in the situation with Lady Bird Johnson in the White House that she was invited to a luncheon, and there was a question of the day, and when she was asked her opinion, she gave her answer. And it was in many ways a surprise to her that they were so offended by having somebody give their actual opinion. So she didn't resent that as much as it just didn't make any sense to her. When she grew up, her given name was Eartha, and she truly was connected to the universe in a very different way, I believe. And of course, I now. Hindsight is 20/20, and as an adult, you see a lot differently than when you were a kid. And I just thought she was kind of a weird mother. But now I look at her and I think, wow, she really was connected to the spirits and the vibrations that went on around her and the world more than anybody else, certainly at the time, or people were not talking about it, not as aware. You were just kind of an eclectic, crazy person. If you were famous, you were eccentric. If you weren't famous, you were crazy. But she really followed her heart, and because she didn't have anybody else, there's no other guidance. She didn't have any family. She didn't have any parents to say this is how you should do it. So she just went with her heart and her gut, and that's what she always went with.
Remarking on how you felt about your mother, now that you have your own kids, what are some of the things that you went through with your mother now that you probably weren't too fond of, and now you're going through with your own kids, and you're going, when I was growing up, I did ... and now you're going through the exact same thing that I did?
My mother raised me a little bit differently in that she never really stated, I did this, and she really taught by example. And she lived her life and gave me the freedom to live mine, but really did show me, gave me an amazing foundation, an unbelievable amount of love and affection. I am much more the parent who says, screaming and yelling, you should do this and you should do that. I found my mother as a teenager to be incredibly annoying. We would drive in the car and she would do these crazy facial exercises, and I was mortified, and I'd be like, stop dancing, stop singing, don't talk, don't breathe, don't do, like a typical teenager that my kids do to me. But I was an only child with a single parent, and my parents divorced very early on. So, and my mother was so connected to me. I think that it was a little bit. My kids, I think, have a little bit more of a great, area that they can push me a little further than I could push my mother. My mother was very, very strict, so you didn't really step outside the lines that much.
I'm still waiting for the day where I can tell my kids those kind of stories. I grew up and I did this, now you're going through it. That may not come for a very long time, which is okay. I'm okay. What do you think most people would be surprised to know about your mom the most?
Be surprised to know about her. She a lot of people don't realize how shy she was. She was really very, her childhood was very present, even during her as an adult, and she was very fearful of rejection. And before she would walk on stage, she was terrified. You almost had to push her out there, And there were times when I'd be like, "Oh, let's get over this already. Just get out there. It's not a big deal." But she was really afraid of not being accepted, not the audience somehow. Well, first of all, not people not showing up. She'd always say, "Are there people out there?" And then, she was afraid that people wouldn't love her. And of course they did. And all she had to do was step onto the stage. But
I would not have thought that.
Yeah, she was really, really scared, which I don't think is unique so much to performers. I think that there's an insecurity that many, if not most, performers have.
Interesting. It was a great loss when she passed away. I remember talking to my mother and other family members, and they had all these memories about Eartha Kitt, and of course the famous from Batman. I can't do it.
I can't either.
Did you say everything you wanted to say to her? Were there any regrets about things you wished you had the opportunity to say?
I am so incredibly blessed that as much closure as you could possibly have when you lose a parent as close as my mother and I were. I worked for my mother also for the last 25 years, and as much closure as anybody can have, I was able to have. Did we say everything? I don't know if you said everything. I don't know if you ever really say everything. But she was home when she passed, and I was with her pretty much 24/7 for the last 2 month of her life. The last 3 weeks she was home in bed, in a hospital bed, and we had hospice attending to her. But she did not want nurses 24 hours a day. The nurse came in and then left, and I was the one that stayed with her all the time. So in that respect, we didn't talk about anything deep necessarily. We watched, Turner music, Turner movies, and she loved Peter Falk and Columbo, and we watched movies and we watched game shows and we laughed, and she was very funny. I was propping up her pillows and I'm like, "Are you okay?" And she looked at me and she said, "I'm dying. I'm not deaf." So we had moments where we really did. There was humor right up to the end, as sad as it was, and it was not an easy passing. The woman did not leave this earth easily. She kicked and screamed and fought every second of it. But I was there with her, and that's exactly how it was meant to be. So I was very blessed in having that.
What do you miss the most about her?
She thought I was the funniest thing on the planet. She laughed at everything. My children think I'm, the least funny thing on the planet. So I'm left now to talk to the dogs, who, find me somewhat amusing. I miss her unconditional love. That's what I miss. Yeah, she truly, truly. There were times in my life when I thought she loved me too much, because that's what kids do. But as a parent, I don't think you can ever love a child too much. I think as long as your child knows that they have your love, that's the greatest gift you can give your kids.
As we wrap this up, I would like you to talk about the ways in which you are preserving her legacy, because I think it's so important, which is part of the reason why I like collecting interviews about people who have paved the way in many ways for all of America. And a lot of people don't know a lot about history. They don't know enough about it. And you're doing something very significant with keeping her legacy alive. Talk about the things that you're doing, especially the Kitt-isms, which I found quite interesting.
Yes.
Amusing.
My mother was very good at making statements, don't panic, just breathe, God may not be there when you want him, but he's always on time. These were not unique statements. These were not necessarily her own. I'm sure heard them from other places. But once my mother said them, then they became hers. So she would often have things that she would say on a regular basis that, now, of course, I repeat to my kids. And she wrote everything down on little pieces of paper, on tissues, on napkins, on hotel note cards, on anything. So I have all of these, what she used to refer to as Kitt-isms, because she thought that was very clever. And I'm compiling them all and we're putting them in a book, and I put them on the fan page, the Facebook fan page, and on the website. earthakit.com. And, and she said some really amazingly profound things, because I think that she was really connected to the planet. And she was, her name was Eartha. She was a Capricorn. She is part Cherokee Indian. I think that there is a lot, indigenous peoples are function on a different level. I think that she was brought up learning the environment is really, you pay attention to your environment. If the animals would eat a plant, then she thought, well, it's probably safe to consume that as well. Or the seasons, that you respect where you live, which would be the earth in her mind. She didn't like material things, diamonds or cars or furs. I mean, she did, but she would always say that, they're not making any more earth. They don't make any more land. That's the thing you have to take care of and treasure the most. So in that, I grew up eating organic food way before it was trendy and hip to do that. We had a vegetable garden in Beverly Hills. She was the original Beverly Hillbilly, I used to say. People thought she was crazy, but nowadays everybody's living that way. My mother felt everything should be very simple. Food, our lifestyle, that we were making it as a society much too complicated. So I am trying to bring her sense of style and her sense of her world to continue that and that legacy, and with the Kittisms, and I'm working on a memoir of my life with her and the humor that she brought to every situation, including when she was dying. She just enjoyed living. And that I'm hoping to be able to preserve and pass on, and as well as her, her civil rights, the movement that she was a part of, and the things that she would do on her own, whether they be, there were, in the 50s, she couldn't even walk in the front door of many establishments that she performed in. So she would insist on, as she got more famous, integrated audiences, and I have to walk through the front door, and so do my musicians.
She insisted that.
She insisted that. Because she said it's just basic human common sense. It wasn't even so much human rights. It was just human common sense that we're all should be treated equally. So those are the pieces that I'm trying to formulate and put together and develop a brand, and using her name Eartha, which to me represents not only her, but everything that we treasure and that we love, of what the earth being, especially nowadays, people are realizing, which my mother realized a long time ago, how precious and important it is to preserve it and take care of it and honor it. So in that, I hope I honor my mother as well. There is a story that about South Africa that was very profound in my life. In 1974, my mother agreed to go to South Africa, which was still during apartheid, and was not well, many people say it was not an honorable stand that she took, that she decided she agreed to go there. She felt that artists were actually the true diplomats, because in her mind, artists did not have a color or religion. They were able to break boundaries much more than politicians ever could. So she felt that she could do more by going to South Africa and insisting on performing for integrated audiences than she could by boycotting and refusing to go there. So we went, and we went for 3 months. I had never been there. I had read about Africa in the books or seen it in television, and I don't know what I expected. Somehow to land in some field someplace, and we flew into Johannesburg, and there was this big city like we were in New York City, and I was like, whoa, there's buildings and regular kind of civilization. And through our trip, we were raising money for African schools, to build schools for the Africans, because they had to pay for their schools. And we learned that there were different classes. There was the black African, which was the low man on the totem pole. There was the colored, which would be Indians and people of mixed race, and not as dark. And then there was the Afrikaner. We had VIP status because of my mother's, her celebrity status. And so we were able to go anywhere we wanted to. There was this one place in Durban, which was this amazing amusement park that I would go. I had a tutor that traveled with us. And we went every single day, and I loved it. It was so fun, the bumper cars and this and that. And I kept saying to my mother, you have to come to this amusement park. You have to. It's just so much fun. You do this. And finally, after all her rehearsals, she came one day, and we walked in, and we get on the bumper cars, and this gentleman comes over who works there, and he says to my mother, excuse me, are you European? And my mother said, no, I'm American. And he said, no, I mean, are you, European? And she said, no, I'm American. No, are you colored? And she said, well, I guess, she looked at her skin, and she goes, yeah, I guess if you look at my skin color, I'm colored. Well, this is a whites-only park, and you're not, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Not realizing who she was, obviously, and no one had ever questioned my being there because I have blonde hair and light skin, and unless I had been born in South Africa at the time, I would have been, I looked like an Afrikaans. So my mother left and got up out of the bumper car and walked out of the amusement park, and I'm screaming at her, tell him who you are. Tell him you're allowed to be here. You don't have to, the rules don't pertain to us. We're VIPs. You tell him. And she was just like, oh, don't panic. And we left, and I was crying, and this big scene. And 2 days later, she's doing an interview, and she was very quiet about it. She never said anything later that day. She didn't speak about it. She did an interview, and the photographers are in our suite at the hotel, and they said, oh, let's take the picture with the amusement park behind you. And she said, oh, it's so funny you should mention the amusement park. I was thrown out of there the other day. And they were like, what do you mean you were thrown out of there? Oh, well, it was a whites-only park. I went with my daughter, and they asked me to leave. Well, it was big news in the paper, and, the owner contacted my mother and apologized, and what can I do, and anything you ask for I'll give to you. And she said, well, we are raising money for schools, so your check would be much appreciated. And so he sent a check along with I don't know what else, flowers, chocolates, you name it. And he sent us these free tickets to the amusement park, and my mother gathered up myself and a friend and 2 colored children and 2 black children, and and all we walked in, walked into the amusement park, and nobody said a word because the owner was there, obviously. Mm-hmm. So these were the things that she did without making waves, without standing up and screaming, as I would have chosen to do, and said, you don't know who I am, and I'm allowed to be here. My mother didn't function that way. She always knew that there was a way to make a change without making a ruckus. Mm. And that's how she functioned every place in her life. She was very soft-spoken, and she rarely raised her voice. But she, everybody, when they talk about it takes one person can elicit a change, and there's a ripple effect. Well, my mother was the proof that is, in fact, the case.
Well put. Well, I want to thank you for taking out the time
You're very welcome.
Come here to the New School University in this beautiful airspace to share some thoughts about your mother. And as I leave, I hope the underlining tone of this interview would be to dance to the beat of your own drum, because that's what your mom did.
Yes, she did.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. This is Roy Paul for WNSR New School Radio.